Sculpting Hero X finished airing last week, and I gotta say, it might just be one of the best anime this year. Story-wise and animation-wise, it has blown me away, and I'm really hyped to see what they're gonna cook up in Season 2. 2 years ago I saw a clip on YouTube where Hero X was fighting that one cloning dude. Back then I didn't really get what it was, I thought it was kind of like a promotion or something. But 2 years later, here we are. Season 1 has, like I said, finished airing, so I thought, hey, I should sculpt something. So 24 weeks ago, an idea was cooking up in my head. Hero X can change art styles. I can too, as you might have seen with my Dan figures and basically every other one that I've done. With that said, let's do something great. My idea for this figure is kind of interesting. In most of the promotional art, Hero X is pictured in a 2D background. Not much of a surprise there, since he can literally switch art styles, so I thought I'd do something that I've considered for quite a while now. What if I make a figure with a two-dimensional background? And for that, the first thing I had to do, unlike usually, was design that exact background. For that, I whipped out my tablet and started drawing. When X snaps, there are a lot of star shapes and triangles. I took heavy inspiration from this artwork, but I wanted to have it a little bit smaller, so that's exactly what I did. Designing this thing took me like a week, because it was not really easy to figure out how exactly the colors should go, since most of Sculpting Hero X's powers are based on pop art. And technically, I've never worked with that. Not only was that difficult, it also took me a very long time to get each individual layer right. I even had to design the background, but that was a little bit easier because I thought that it would be a good idea to use the negative version of the front side. Now, as you're probably used to by now, the first thing I have to do is the base. I've also been cooking up a little design for that one, which is basically Hero X's ranking as well as the Hero Commission logo. Hero X is not the only figure that I want to make from Sculpting Hero X, since I'm a sucker for nice character designs, and wow, look at Isoul and Queen and Ghostblade, they're just so fucking cool, dude. Anyways, I wanted to do something similar with Dan where the base is kinda similar since they're from the same anime. The only thing I would maybe change is the ranking as well as a different logo for the individual agencies of the heroes. Anyways, first of all, I glued the design that I had onto a thicker piece of paper using super glue. The reason for that is that super glue on paper becomes like plastic. I discovered that in my Chainsaw Man figure. Go check it out. Speaking of Chainsaw Man, I'm gonna make Rise soon, so stay tuned for that. Once that was dried, I cut it out into different layers and then just stuck it on top of each other to give it more of a three-dimensional effect. Technically, these details aren't really necessary, I just basically am doing this for myself, so yeah. Once each layer was glued together, I just had to glue it on top of a wooden plate, as always. Here's another close-up shot of the base, so you can properly see the three-dimensional detail, because I kinda forgot to record the finished base. Moving on, it is now time to make Hero X himself. For that, as always, I made a wire skeleton. With that being done, I put the figure into a snapping position and drilled some holes into the base. Then I covered it with clay. Now the first thing that I sculpted were the shoes. For that I first had to get the shape right. Using a clay knife I added some seam lines, and with a thin clay strip some further detail. Since I didn't want to ruin the detail on the shoes, I put them in the oven and baked them. After that it was time to make the pants. For that, as I usually do, I stuck some clay noodles onto the legs and blended them together. At times like these, I am really thankful that Sculpting Hero X has 3D models, because that way it was much easier to get the wrinkles right. Once the wrinkles were done, I added a thin clay strip onto the crotch section for the zipper. Since Hero X is wearing a suit, it was also important to sculpt the folding line. For that I just rolled out a thin clay noodle and stuck it vertically onto the legs, front and back. Then it was just a matter of blending it together until it looked smooth, without ruining any details of the folds. After that, I had to make the pockets. That was quite simple, since it's basically just a thin clay strip that I also blended together. Also, I am very glad that one of his hands is in his pockets, because that way I don't have to sculpt another hand. Having sculpted the figure, I had to put it into the oven in order to not ruin any further detail. Now, before I can continue, I had to make the head first. Somehow I forgot to record making the mouth, but I think you get it, since you probably have seen my other videos. Right? To make the ears, I just had to use a thin clay noodle and wrap it in a spiral, then glue it on the size of the head and add the details. While making this, I am yet again thankful that there is a 3D model of Hero X, because sculpting is way easier when you have an actual 3D model that you can look at. Anyways, let's make the hand. For that, as always, I bent some wires in the appropriate shape, glued them together with green stuff and then covered them with clay. I'm using Cosclay doll for this because it sticks better to wire. Once the hand was done, I just had to glue it onto the left arm and blend it together with some clay. I also stuck the head onto the figure and added some neck muscles. With that done, it was time to make his shirt. For that, luckily, I only had to make his collar. I did that wrapping 2 clay strips around his neck. I kinda noticed that one of the clay strips is a bit unnecessary, so next time I know how to make it better. I also had to make the tie. Now on top of his tie there is a little X pin. I did that separately on a box cutter, which I then torched, and after it was done I decided that I would glue it on after I painted the entire thing, because that way it's much easier to paint the tie. Moving on, it was time to make his waistcoat. For that I yet again had to use thin clay strips. Most of that area is gonna be covered by the jacket later, so I didn't really bother adding many details there. I just stuck on these clay strips and blended them until they looked good. The only proper detail I had to add were the buttons. For that I used my pointy wooden tool and pressed in a few dents where the buttons should go. As for the buttons themselves, they were just little clay balls that I pressed flat. Then I threw the figure into the oven again. Now it is time to make the jacket. For that I first had to make the shoulders, since they are a bit pointy. Following that up, I of course also had to add wrinkles to each arm. And as you can see, I also had to bulk out the back a little bit. Anyways, once the folds were finished, I had to add yet another clay strip to the arms to sculpt the black shirt that is sticking out underneath. I also decided to add X's smartwatch. It is a very small detail, not really necessary, but it's a nice little touch. So many clay strips in this project. Talking about clay strips! I also had to make the sleeves that were rolled over. I also had to make sure that they stand up a little bit from the arms. That said, it was now time to finish the jacket. I rolled out a large piece of clay and then wrapped it around the entire figure. Then I cut it to size and blended it onto the back. As I stated earlier, I had to bulk up the back a little bit, and the reason for that is that the jacket is standing up from the back. To secure the entire thing in place, I had to bake the figure again, but this time I also had to add some wrinkles onto the back. The only thing missing on the suit is the lapel. And since right now he's looking like someone who has beef with a Kryptonian, I had to make the hair. And to make that I rolled out some thin pieces of clay and stuck them on top of it. Hero X has a mullet, so I had to make the hair appropriately. And of course I blended it together using my pointy wooden tool. Another small thing that makes the entire sculpt a little bit easier is that his hair is slicked back, so I just had to add lines on the top of his head. And with that the sculpting process is done.
So, as you've seen in the beginning of the video, I designed his 2D background. The idea I had was to make it a layered 2D background to still give it somewhat of a 3D effect and to be able to differentiate what is in the front and the back. For that I printed out each individual layer of my design and glued it onto some thicker paper, just like with the base. After I glued them on with some super glue, I of course had to cut them out. And as some of you might know, I did that in a TikTok live stream. So yeah, follow me on TikTok. Moving on, I had to glue each individual piece together. The background was quite simple because it's just stacked on top of each other, but like I said, I wanted to make a layered effect, so I added transparent acrylic rods in between each layer. I also used the same acrylic rods to glue on these floating triangles. The only thing I had to make sure was that they were connected in between the layers. It may not have aligned 100% how I wanted it to, but it's close enough, and that's good for me. And to finish off the background and stabilize it on the base, I used a metal wire for that. I did consider using another acrylic rod, but they are a bit flexible, so I decided that I should just go ahead and use the metal wire. It's much more stable. And there it is. I really have to say that it turned out much better than I thought it would. Anyways, let's paint this shit. Starting off with the base. For that, I painted the entire base black first. Then I used a sponge and dabbed on a little bit of grey. And once that was dried as well, I weathered it down with watered down acrylic beige. Since it was a little bit too bright for me, I weathered it down again, but this time with black acrylic wash. With that set aside, I started painting Hero X. As you can already guess, I had to cover the entire figure with white. This took me way too long, so maybe I should consider buying an airbrush one day. Anyways, the idea I had was that I would paint him in his 3-dimensional art style. To achieve that, I'm going for a softer cell shading. You're gonna understand what I mean with that later. So after the figure was painted white, I started adding grey shadows in the folds of the clothes. I used a very light grey because I really wanted the shadow to appear quite soft. If it was a little bit darker, it would probably look too much cell shaded. And a little fun fact here, I noticed while painting that I forgot to add the belt buckle, so I made it out of clay and glued it on now. Oh, and if you guys are wondering why I'm wearing a glove, the figure is white and it can get dirty easily, so yeah, I don't want the paint to get ruined. With that said, after the first layer of grey was added, I went in and added a few darker highlights in the shadows using a grey that is a little bit darker. I also went in and painted a few strands of his hair grey. Now, what I would usually do at this point in time, once I've added the shadows, was to add line art. Usually I would add black lines, but like I stated earlier, I wanted to go in for a softer cell shading to mimic his 3D art style, so I decided to use dark grey for that. And what can I say? While making this, I did notice that this was indeed the best idea that I've had. Because what I did have in mind before that was just to paint it regular white, and not add any cell shading in that area. The reason why I didn't was because low-key cell shading just looks better, and otherwise it would have probably been a little bit bland. Kinda reminds me when I look at my older figures. I mean, they're good, but I'm gonna have to consider if I'm only gonna make cell-shaded figures from now on, or something like a mixture of the both, like what I'm doing with this figure. You can comment your opinion down below. I would really like to know your guys' opinion on that. Moving on, it was now time to paint the folded sleeves. Pretty simple because it's simply a red shade. I also painted the tie the exact same color. Now at this point it was time to paint the left arm, or basically said the arm that is snapping art styles. Since the figure I'm making has already snapped, I decided to paint that specific arm in a different art style. I took inspiration from the 6-minute fight video and decided to paint the sleeves a little bit different of a color. As you can see here, I first painted it a lighter red mixed with orange, and in the shadowy area of the sleeve I decided to add purple, which I then blended together with a little bit of blue. As for the shading, I went with a mixture of light blue, purple, green and yellow. This was basically an entire freestyle. I just simply took inspiration from the fight scenes of Hero X, but to be honest I had no idea what I'm doing. Also, I am basically blending the colors on the figure itself, to give the shadows a bit of a paint variation. Since the arm is supposed to represent a different art style, I decided to make the line art on that arm magenta. Because when he switches art styles in the videos, the line art has a different color than black as well. Once that was dried, I added a separation line between the art styles using a very light blue. It's basically the same line than in the video. It also makes the switch between the art styles a bit more visible. Then it was time to paint the skin. For that I painted the face and the hand. To be in line with the somewhat cell shading that I'm doing here and give the face a bit more detail, I used a darker skin shade and added highlights on the face. Not only does this make it appear more like the 3D model they use in the anime, or better said donghua, but it also gives the face more contour. As for the left hand, I cell shaded it as if it were a 2-dimensional art style. Then I had to paint his eyes. The pupils and his eyebrows. I also added some more magenta lines on the left hand. And to finish it off, I had to glue on the silver painted X that I've made earlier. Now there is one last detail missing, and that is his glasses. Since glasses usually are transparent, I bought myself some acrylic sheets. They appear to be a mixture of orange and yellow, so what I did was stack the two of them on top of each other. That way the color that results out of the two of them is the exact color that I need. Now, to properly make these glasses, I first had to cut out the basic shape. This is my second time doing glasses, so this took me like 3 attempts. After that was cut out, I glued it on my desk. I also had to cut out the orange glass sheet, and I then added super glue on top of it and glued the two sheets together. Once that was dried, I only had to paint the frames using black acrylic paint, and then I glued it onto the figure. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Hero X. My fucking god, the amount of work that I've put into this figure is absolutely insane. I've made this within 2 weeks and I spent an entire week editing, especially because of the impact frames that I put in the snaps for the transitions. But I'm gonna be honest, if I didn't put them in there, then it wouldn't be a video of mine. Because I guess you could say that each video I make is a little artwork of itself in its own way. I'm gonna put a small combination of each impact frame at the end of the video, by the way. Please check them out. It was so much work, but I guess that's what makes Hero X so cool. Anyways, I'm really proud of this figure. You can really see how much I improved sculpting within these last 4 years, and I am especially happy that the idea that I've had 24 weeks ago turned out the exact way I wanted it to. If you did enjoy watching this video, I would be really happy if you subscribed, hit the bell, comment down below, like, you know the drill. I apologize yet again for the long wait, but it was totally worth it. If you want to keep up with what I'm doing, then follow me on Instagram. I post basically daily updates there and keep you updated with what I'm working on. With that said, I don't think that there's anything else that I want to say, so yeah, enjoy the compilation of impact frames that I made. And see you guys next time. Bye bye!